First of all, isn't it cool that the health department is willing to take on tough issues and have conversation with the general public about that? I love it. Once we came out with this special, we received a lot of feedback. I had churches calling saying, can you come talk to our youth groups? I've had schools calling, and then a lot of our great community partners have called and said, wait, I think we need to get into this, whether it's Wedgwood or Helen DeVos Children's Hospital and a variety of people who are doing all the hard work, and now we can come together and just say, let's really get the conversation going. And to just show you how relevant and real this topic is, I know you know it, we actually have been out talking with teenagers, a lot of them, to find out what it's really like. What's it like to be in a middle school right now? You might talk to a teacher and get one side of things, but the kids will tell us a different story. Getting my hair cut today, design one, I'm chatting, and I talk about what we're going to do tonight. And I've got two 20-somethings next to me, and they're rolling their eyes at me. And I'm like, oh, I'm hitting a hot button. I like it. So I'm like, hey, what's your opinion about vaping? And they're like, nothing. And I'm like, no, I want to know. And they're like, we don't vape nicotine. Oh. So you vape, but you're not vaping nicotine. So you're vaping pot? And they're like, oh. And they roll their eyes, and they're like, everybody vapes pot. It's not dangerous. And I thought, okay, we need to be doing these community conversations, and we need them more. So that's why we're here tonight. And we did our first series. I love it because we ran it on 420. And I had people at Wood TV8 with like, Miranda, we know you're sheltered, but do you know what 420 means? And I'm like, no, what's 420? But the good news is 420 caught a lot of attention. People were celebrating all kinds of things, but we were celebrating the important role parents and educators play in the lives of their kids. And that you're here today, I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking it serious. So we've put together a series of experts we want to share with you today. We've got some teenagers who are going to be joining us. Rockford High School's putting some stuff together for what they've got going. I think this is the tip of the iceberg about these conversations. So those of you who are here are our messengers. I want you to take what we're doing here today and bring it back to wherever you're going to be to really get those conversations at a very grassroots level. So to start it, I'm going to bring up my friend Dr. Shelley Schmidt from Spectrum Health. Let's give her a big round of applause. Hello, my dear. So I love it because you suddenly came forward and said, this is a topic I want to be a part of. Tell me, first of all, what do you do at Spectrum Health? And then why did you decide you needed to get in on the conversation?
Well, I'm a pulmonary physician at Spectrum Health, and I'm the director of our pulmonary fibrosis program, which means I focus on scarring lung diseases. And I was originally interested in vaping because these chemicals, the metals, the wicking materials, all of those materials have been associated with lung inflammation or scarring, which showed itself in spectacular fashion in late 2019 and early 2020 with thousands of vaping-induced lung injuries in addition to dozens of deaths. And so that got me thinking about and talking both to middle schoolers and high schoolers about vaping throughout West Michigan, and really in addition to the lung injuries, really the fear of the nicotine addiction.
So it's not that I need to be just scared of nicotine, and if I'm not vaping nicotine, I'm cool.
So that's absolutely right. So what we saw with all those vaping-induced lung injuries was that 70 to 80% of them were associated with marijuana. And so while there were 20 to 30% associated with nicotine-induced, we saw a lot with marijuana. And again, lungs are not designed for anything other than normal clean air. And so anytime we're putting something else in the lungs that's not normal clean air, you're going to inflame them. The question is how much and how severe is that going to be?
So what are you seeing? I mean, a lot of people, vaping was a big thing 2 or 3 years ago. Have things changed?
So unfortunately, this is the perfect storm that we're seeing on the tail of the pandemic, with a rise in mental health difficulty with our teenagers in combination with these nicotine devices in play. So while we spent the last 2 years working hard on the greatest pandemic known to mankind, big tobacco and nicotine companies have spent the last 2 years creating devices that evade FDA regulation and have a terrifying amount of nicotine in them. We used to be afraid of the Juul pod, which was about 1 pack of bioavailable nicotine. There are disposable devices now that are 5 packs, 10 packs of nicotine in a disposable device. And the thing that makes nicotine so powerful as a drug of abuse is that it's an incredible anxiety release drug. And so it works in the instinctual brain, and when it does so, it triggers a safety signal that's very strong and powerful. That instinctual safety is what our kids are looking for in this time of stress and with this mental health difficulty. And so that's what grabs hold, and then what makes it stick is the longer it's been since that safety signal, this instinctual brain signals threat. And so they start to feel that. They feel it as anxiety, they feel it as anger, and all they have to do is go back to the vape, we're back to safety again.
So some might argue, well, if it makes them feel a little less anxious, and these are crazy times, isn't it okay to just take a hit or two?
Right, and so what we know from the US Surgeon General is that no amount of nicotine in the developing brain is safe. And that's because nicotine and nicotine-addicted youth are more likely to have worse outcomes in terms of school performance, in terms of sports, in terms of what kind of job they're going to get, how much money they're going to make. They have more trouble with the legal system. They have more risk-taking behaviors. And nicotine is a gateway drug, so it just leads on to other drugs aside. And so nicotine is extremely dangerous. It's the third most addictive substance known to man. And so we have to take that nicotine addiction and that gateway to further drugs and for further loss of socioeconomic status at heart, because these are our kids that we have and their lives that we're dealing with here.
What's that one thing you want our educators, our caregivers, and our parents to know from your side of the story?
I think what's so important for us as a community to realize is that this isn't about kids just kind of goofing off in school. They're not doing it because they want to. They're doing it because this is an addiction. Our kids are addicted, and they've been taken advantage of by billion-dollar companies that know exactly how to do this, that have done it for decades. And so we have to wrap ourselves around our kids. We need to regulate these devices. We need to keep them out of our hands of our kids. And we need to make sure that our communities are protected. And we need to protect ourselves. You know, as parents, they feel guilty that their kids are using these devices. And again, this isn't about bad parenting. It's not about good or bad kids. It's not about good or bad parents. This is about an industry that has targeted our kids to addict our kids to make money off our kids. And we need to come together to take care of them and protect them.
I want to get a petition going around the room. Thank you. So enlightening. Dr. Schmidt, you're awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's give her a round of applause. So I would like to show the video, one of the videos from the first part of our series. Just to put things into perspective, we talked to a lot of different people, and this will set the tone for the rest of our conversation. Let's take a look. Teens and youth are vaping in record numbers. In fact, for the first time ever, e-cigarettes have surpassed conventional cigarettes as the most commonly used tobacco product among youth. Now, this is sounding an alarm with educators, parents, law enforcement, and teens themselves. I wanted to find out more about this epidemic. So I spoke with a lot of teens. I visited schools around West Michigan. I went to vape shops and spent time on social media to find out about the attraction and the addiction of vaping.
It happens a lot in the bathroom, like just sitting there, and like you'll just walk in, and then some girls will be like, "Hey, like, you're not a snitch or anything, like, will you try this?" And your brain wants to say no, like, you know to say no, but it's like hard sometimes to say yes. Like I've always said no, like never done it, but like I've seen girls who have been like, "Oh, I guess," like very hesitant because people are like, "Oh, will you try it? Will you try it? Will you try it?"
I'd say it's somewhat normalized, especially if you have friends who do it and you see them doing it, and it's like you have to make the decision not to, but then they're your friends because you don't want to like make them mad at you or anything. Like, just so many people are doing it.
The first time I tried it just with my friends, just to look cool around school, and it really wasn't cool at all. And then the second time I also tried it because of my friends, but I don't know, it was just one of those things that, you know, you're curious about, so why not try it?
Everyone probably in their high school will be offered a vape. Their kids are not innocent.
The situation is very real. Even if you think your kid has never been around anyone who's vaped, chances are they have. And I think it's a conversation that all parents should have with their kids and be like, here are the risks, here's why you shouldn't do it, and how dangerous it is for you. There'll be like multiple kids in one stall, like you'll see multiple feet on the ground. And there'll be times where teachers walk in and kids like jump on toilet seats to make it look like there's like only one person in there.
you can physically get impacted, and above that, you can get mentally impacted, feeling guilty for vaping, feeling bad that you did that, and it's like a full circle kind of thing. I've heard people like talk or heard somebody say to me, I can just get you someone. So it's like a chain reaction really, and once somebody has like somebody to get it from and other people want it, it just keeps going.
It's usually like the cool factor. The people who they look up to, some of those older kids who have started vaping, and they want to be cool, they want to be accepted. It's also a group. It's a group to hang out with. It's a social moray for some, cliques and groups.
There's a lot of myths out there that it's harmless water vapor, and it's not. It's full of chemicals. It's damaging to the whole body. And besides that itself, they're full of nicotine. And so nicotine is the third most addictive drug. Nicotine changes our cognitive ability, especially with young adults and teenagers. It affects their memory. It affects their processing, their instinctions. Nicotine also increases the heart rate and the blood pressure in our bodies and our hearts, because it constricts the blood flow. So there's a really high risk for cardiovascular disease as well. People think, oh, it's a stress release. It's only relieving the stress in that brain that wants it. The rest of the body it stresses out and it harms it.
I think what people have a hard time wrapping their heads around is that the marijuana has evolved over time. So where back in the 60s and 70s when we were dealing with THC levels at about 4 to 5%, THC levels have increased over time to now we're seeing from a plant-based level, we're seeing anywhere from 35 to 40% THC. From a synthesized level, you're talking 99%.
I think when vaping started out, it really came across as not a big deal, and parents really weren't informed. And I think it's taken off to the point now when it's taken over for a lot of kids as far as the substance of choice. It's trickled all the way down to 6th grade now.
Parents need to know that kids want them to talk to them. Study after study, focus group after focus group, we ask kids, what do you want from your parents? To talk to us. They really want to have that close bond. They want to know that they can count on you. They need you to be that trusted resource, not the guy on the corner or the stupid website that Jules put up. They need you to be their trusted resource. So that's what they want and need. But the earlier you can do that, the better.
Kids are doing it more than you possibly think. I'll tell you that. I get a lot of parents that think, not my child, but when it comes to it, it's very, peer pressure on it is very heavy in schools, and it's there and it's out there, and they're using it more than you think.
For that series, we traveled to 7 counties. We talked to 23 different individuals, and man, did we get an earful. So I feel like we can't just say that's one community or whatever. I'll tell you, it was in every county I went to, and it didn't matter if you were young or old, you had a personal connection to vaping. So we have 2 friends joining us from Kent County Health Department. Introduce yourself and tell me what you do with the health department.
Hi, I'm Lauren Zarnhausen. I am a public health educator here at the Kent County Health Department. For the past 5 years, I've focused a lot on substance use prevention in middle schools and a little bit in high schools, doing an evidence-based curriculum called BOTVIN's Life Skills, where we cover 4 different substances or drugs, and then we also really try to build up on those core life skills that youth need.
All right, so you're in the thick of it. You're in the reality of it. And what are kids vaping?
Well, Carolyn will be able to answer what they're vaping more specifically.
Okay, so who's vaping?
Yes, so who's vaping? Really, we're seeing it everywhere all the time, right? So when I get to the lesson talking about vaping and tobacco, I always take in these classes and ask a lot of times with 7th graders who are right around 12 or 13, and I ask them, who in here knows someone that vapes that's your age? Almost 70-90% of them are raising their hands. Who in here knows someone who's in high school and is vaping? Again, 79%, 70 to 90% of the class is raising their hands. I asked them if they've seen it in the bathrooms, on the buses, in the parks. Again, it's a resounding yes, right? So even if you think your kid is not being surrounded by it, that's not the case, right? They are being surrounded by it. It is something that is happening, whether you want to believe it or not.
So when you're talking to young people, what are some of those barriers or things that you can give them to protect themselves and to refuse the peer pressure?
Yeah, so within that curriculum I mentioned, we focus a lot on communication skills, refusal skills, being assertive. And so I think that's what's really important when parents are having these conversations is, yes, we need to educate on the dangers of vaping, but we also need to add in the component of how to stand up for ourselves, setting those boundaries of our friends, because a lot of the times it is in that circle of friends that your child has been around that is vaping and who is maybe egging them on. So it's not something as simple as some random kid asking, right? It's a good friend that they've known for many years. So it gets very complicated. But parents conversations on how to be assertive, building that self-confidence, setting boundaries. That's a really pivotal piece to this prevention and education component around vaping.
Excellent. Carolyn, tell us what you do here with the health department.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Quiney, a health educator here at the health department, along with Lauren, and I coordinated our Tobacco-Free Network Coalition for the county, as well as serve on the Tobacco-Free Michigan Coalition. And have for a few more years than Lauren. I'm not going to say how long.
No one's asking. It's okay. So I want to know the question, what are kids vaping? Yeah. Is it just cherry and Captain Crunch flavored mist?
There are so many flavors, you can't keep track of them. And you know what Dr. Schmidt had alluded to is it's ever changing. They're constantly adapting their products in order to stay out in front of the regulations that come into play. Synthetic nicotine is a big thing that we're seeing, and they call themselves tobacco-free nicotine, which lends more of a healthier feel to it for most people. Oh, it's tobacco-free. That means it's not as dangerous for me. It's not as big a concern. So that one gets a little shifty there. They also come out with labeling that says, you know, it's toxin-free or carcinogen-free, which really isn't proven. So, but they don't fall under the same, guidelines. Yes, thank you, as like Juul had, because of where they're able to say we're not being made by tobacco. So, or it just changes how that all plays out.
So Carolyn, I'm curious because the Tobacco 21 law has been passed. Do you think that's going to maybe put a stop to kids buying and using?
Be great if it would, but that would also mean, you know, kids who are under 21 don't drink alcohol or use marijuana. You know, while those laws are good and they help prevent people from starting maybe as young, and they do have a long-term impact on numbers. You know, for us right now, it's going to be a long time until we see any changes in that. And certainly any youth that were, 17 years old when this law passed aren't going to suddenly say, oh, I can't legally buy anymore. They weren't legally buying to begin with. And unfortunately, retailers in Michigan do have a pretty bad rate of selling to minors.
Ladies, thank you for your time. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. So when we were doing our series, I was finding out all of this information. I was blown away, but I thought, I really want to talk to a kid who's been there and done that. I want to hear from a West Michigan family that's kind of lived the journey. And the Taylor family came to light from Grand Haven. Here's their story. Teens vaping can lead to a full-blown nicotine addiction or many other substances. One Grand Haven family shares their story.
Kids are vaping, we know this. My experience came when my husband told me that our 15-year-old son he suspected was vaping. He was one of those kids where when he took his first hit of that nicotine, he was just, that was amazing. And when he took it, tried it again the next 2 or 3 times, he was completely hooked.
Carolyn's son Casey is currently in a rehabilitation center down south. We had the chance to catch up with him via Zoom. So let's talk a little bit about your journey with vaping.
Right. So I think I was a freshman in high school when it all started out, and you know, I think I experienced kind of that peer pressure from my friend group at the time. And I was in the locker room one day, and you know, someone asked me to hit a vape, and I don't think I had the willpower to say no. You know, I wanted to be seen as kind of cool or accepted for whatever other people were doing, so just hit it.
And then what?
Well, I bought one like the next day. I think the next couple days were like, how do I get the money to buy one of these? So pretty immediately I was hooked on this feeling, this lightheadedness or like relief.
What were you vaping?
Just nicotine. And you know, I think it was a lot easier for me to do because I wasn't smoking a cigarette or smelling bad afterwards. So for me, it became pretty easy to just like, oh, well, it's Captain Crunch flavored, you know, there's no problem with it. And you know, I had very little knowledge of the effect that it would have on me in the long run.
So you really liked it?
Yeah. I think, I not even liked it. I loved it. It was instantaneously, I was like, this is what I was missing, you know, for all this time. And it didn't stop there. I mean, it continued on to pills and, you know, substances, and it really did not go very well for me. And to think that it all started with doing something I didn't want to, it as innocent as like hitting a cherry flavored vape is mind-boggling. But that's what it all comes back to is not listening to myself when I wanted to say no. I got caught vaping in the locker room sophomore year and got kicked off of the track team. And getting kicked off the track team just blew out the flame that I had for it. You know, my whole life up until that point, I was an avid runner. I loved being athletic. I loved sports. And I just gave up. You know, here I was, an innocent freshman in high school, you know, and now I'm 18 years old, 1,000 miles away from home in rehab, you know, because I decided, you know, some cherry flavored vape was a good idea. I was told not to do a lot of things and I didn't listen to them. But what I will say is that if you find yourself, you know, vaping and you can't figure out why, like there's just something in you that says I need this and I have to have this, I think at that point you need to tell somebody, as awkward as it might be. And I think luckily we're destigmatizing the ick around, you know, I've got this problem going on. But seriously, I would recommend saying, listen, man, I don't know what it is. I don't know why I can't stop, but I can't. You know, at that point, I would reach out for help because, you know, you might not end up like me, but why risk it? And to the parents who, you know, have difficulty understanding, I would just say, you know, there are a lot of things that kids do that you just have no clue, you know, why they're doing it. And I think if they would just ask their kid, I think they would also not have a clue, you know, why they're doing it. So I think a lot of those parents who, not necessarily clueless, but curious on why their kid is doing something, have that conversation with them. You know, why are you doing this? You know, are you sad? Are you depressed? Are you feeling some type of way that makes you, you know, feel like you need this? Or are you just doing it because you think it's cool? And go at that with like a non-judgmental standpoint, because if your kid responds, well, I'm just doing it because I'm cool, and you get upset, well, then they're not going to feel like they can come to you with anything. So setting up a conversation or an open conversation where your child feels safe to bring problems to you, especially specifically surrounding, you know, vaping and drugs and stuff like that, because in the long run, it'll be beneficial. power behind standing up for what you believe in, even if that is as small as saying, hey, I don't want to hit a vape. You know, it's not my thing. In the long run, it will help you in so many different ways.
Hundreds of times, and every time I'm just like you. My eyes fill with tears because Casey is a good young man. Articulate, smart, kind. Carolyn, mother of Casey, what happened?
Well, he kind of told his story. Gosh, it does make me tear up. He's a great kid. He's a really great kid, and he just fell victim to what so many do, you know? He just was in the locker room and felt the need to say yes. And for him, that first hit was just amazing, like he said. I mean, he said it better than anybody could. And yeah, things just really went downhill, as you can see. You know, he does live 1,000 miles away from us now. He's out of the rehab and he's been in sober living. He's actually been in sober living for a year now. And actually 2 weeks ago, he moved out. So that's good. He's doing really well. He's still part of a program, but he's now living with 2 other roommates who've been through sober living as well and working a job and, you know, starting to live his life at 19 and figure out what that means.
So what are some of the things your family lost?
Oh, gosh. I mean, just so much, right? So he's our oldest child. We have 2. And just that whole senior year and before senior year, right? Those end of school things, you know, senior prom. I mean, he was on medical leave in rehab, right? When all that happened. And when parents were complaining because it was COVID and they couldn't get graduation tickets enough for their family, I just either wanted to strangle him or cry because it's like, my kid's in rehab. You know, there's bigger problems here than you not having a ticket for somebody for graduation. So, you know, we missed all that. I mean, I couldn't even bring myself to go to any of his friends' graduation open houses, like for 2 years after. I mean, just couldn't do it. I can't even think about it. It's just still, it hurts. And all the things that you think you're going to teach your child during those years. We had a Zoom conversation with him and his counselor just yesterday, my husband and I did. And, you know, they're launching him, right? So they're helping to launch him and do all these things and setting up a dentist and a family doctor and, you know, and talking more about budgeting, which they've talked a lot about that. But, you know, I don't know what he doesn't know because I haven't even been with him for like the last 2 years because he's been in rehab or out of rehab, or even the year before when he was using all the time and just wasn't present and wasn't that Casey. He was a totally different kid. So we've lost a lot. You know, it's really tough. And his sister, you know, she's 13 and she lost a big brother. She loves him a lot and, you know, talks to him, but it's just so different. And it's not what I would want for anybody else, other than we do have a positive outcome.
So Carol, you're a VP at a local financial institution. Your husband works in the school district. You were aware of what was going on, but it spiraled quickly, didn't it? And I think a lot of us are like, you know what, if my kid's doing it, I'm going to step in and we're going to make some changes.
That's exactly what we thought. That's exactly what we thought. Yeah, my husband's mostly a stay-at-home dad. He just works during the school year with the kids. He's the one that caught it because he was picking up Casey after track and he caught kind of a funky smell and he's like, what is this? And for a while it was just nothing, you know, I walked through a cloud of vape, or I just had a Gatorade that was flavored or something, you know. And so we thought, okay, well, you know, we don't think he's doing anything, but my husband is always really suspicious, so he was always looking. And, you know, a few weeks later, like 3 weeks it probably took before he found something, evidence of the vape, and I didn't want to believe it, but you know, there's always that denial. He'd been using a lot. I mean, clearly he was addicted from the beginning, so we made sure he didn't have access to money. He didn't have a car yet because he hadn't finished driver's ed yet. So, you know, he didn't have that. We restricted everything we could, and he still found ways. Like, they find a way, make a way, find a way. I've got to have it, right? His body was telling him, I've got to have this nicotine. So we did take him to the family doctor, which was really good. And the doctor had him use some nicotine patches. He gave us some guidance for that because they aren't really for minors, and you've got to talk to your family doctor. It's an addiction. I mean, we did realize he's addicted. Like, this isn't something we can just tell him to quit. And yeah, it escalated pretty quickly. He did end up vaping marijuana as well. It was just so natural. He said it was nothing to just change what was in the thing, to just shift it out and change it. It's the same, habit of doing the vape, or however they do it, I don't know. But so, yeah, I mean, it was just so much, so fast, and we just had no idea how much was happening either until after the fact.
And he was telling me, of course, that, he's mixing a fifth of whatever at night while he's vaping some pot and then popping a couple pills in the morning, and he's still functioning and moving through life. At some point, you said enough is enough, and I know you tried over and over. What would you say to parents and caregivers today who are like, my kid is dabbling in this stuff, it's scary to me, but I don't want to get him mad at me. Like, what do I do?
Yeah. A lot of it is what Casey said. I mean, we've learned so much through this. I mean, one, you've got to talk about it. Talk about it with your kids' friends' parents. Hopefully we're connected, right? And talk about it with them. Talk about it with your kids. When they come and say, I've got this problem, which he didn't, but it became evident. But like he said, you've just got to realize that they're scared, and they probably don't know why either. They just know their body's telling them that this is what they have to do. So you want to let them know that they're loved. I mean, addiction is ugly. It's really ugly. And like he said, he got into pills and he got into alcohol. And I mean, we had a parent at home. We have a modest home that's a ranch, that everybody's on the same floor and everything. It's not like he's got a whole lower level of, games and sports and to hide. It wasn't anything like that. And we still it took us so long to find out. And he was doing that like after we went to bed at night. We'd go to bed at 10 or something like that, and next thing you know, at 11:30, he's drinking. I mean, I don't even know where he got the stuff, because as soon as we figured everything out, we got rid of it all. So, we didn't know where he was getting it. He was getting it from friends. He was getting it from wherever, and he would drink sometimes, a fifth of alcohol at night. I mean, this is a 110-pound kid at the time. Like, I don't even know how he functioned. I really don't know. He was crabby and mean. I can tell you that much. His grades suffered horribly. He didn't graduate high school with his friends. Fortunately, he did actually graduate with a diploma last year, so a year late, but he did, and that's a huge thing, I think. That was a big accomplishment. He couldn't believe how easy it was once his mind wasn't all messed up. Like, oh, surprise.
Carolyn, you are a courageous mom. Thank you for sharing your story and for sharing your son with us. He's a good one. We're going to keep checking in. Let's give Carolyn a big round of applause. Thank you. I'm going to have my friend Zoe slide up here. We met Zoe in the first video. And Zoe, why don't you have a seat right here? Let's just talk about, so tell me about school. What grade are you in?
So I just started 9th grade, so transitioning from middle school to high school.
How's that going?
Pretty good. It's, with the whole vaping situation, it's very surreal now, seeing the difference between how it was.
How? Like, what's different?
So in middle school, you knew a couple people were vaping, you knew people were getting it from somewhere, but you didn't know where. But in high school, people are discreet about it. They're, oh yeah, I got this, I'm vaping. Like, I can see people walking down the hallway with a vape in their hand. Like, no hiding it whatsoever. So that's like, oh, so you don't care. And then people are very open about it, like, oh yeah, I vape. Or like, do you want some? And it's just like, there's so many other people doing it more than in middle school. So it's like a very surreal experience to know that there's more people, and it just keeps getting more.
How does that impact you when you are kind of surrounded by everyone who's just sneaking a quick hit from the backpack?
It's obviously very frustrating, because you're like, this isn't what needs to happen. Like, this isn't what's supposed to happen. And so you're like, this needs to stop. But you can't, like, you can say something like I've said before, like, why are you doing this? And they're going to be like, I don't know. Or like, I don't know, I just like it. And I'm like, maybe try to like figure out why you're doing this. Why are you attracted to it? Why is it, like, why do you keep doing it? Because you obviously have to find a way to get it, and you have to think about it. And I've had people ask me for money, like, do you have money so I can buy a new vape? No, I'm not giving that to you.
So what do the adults in this room need to hear from a kid who's a freshman in a local high school, just living life, but surrounded by what we're discussing?
That it's real. It's really real. And like everyone else has said, you just need to talk about it, have an open conversation. Don't get mad. I mean, obviously you're going to be frustrated, but try to help them in the best way possible and try to prevent it as much as you can, because that's all you can do.
Keep saying no. Thank you. Zoe, let's give it up for Zoe. Yes. I'd like Karan and Vicky to come join us. Both of these women are prevention specialists. They're in the thick of it. They live it every day. So we'll start with you. How long have you been involved, and tell us where you do your work?
So I work in Lake County, so in Baldwin. I work for District Health Department number 10. I have been a health educator for 15 years, but I've been specific to substance abuse and prevention for 10 years.
You also have kids, too?
I do. I have 2 children. Leah is 19, and my son Lauren is 14.
And you're on the school board?
I was.
You were? Okay. So you're like plugged in, man. You're in the schools, you're talking to kids, your kids' friends, the whole deal.
I love it.
Tell me what happened at your house.
So I was at a school board meeting, and one of the members of the school board handed me her phone and shows me a video of students vaping, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, you know, I have to go do another class. And at the end of the video, it's my child, and I'm like, oh God. And so I'm, you know, fueling in the meeting and no longer paying attention. Obviously have to have the conversation with my husband. And we realize, okay, we have to like calm down. We of course raid her room. We do find a vape in her room. And it was like one I had never seen before. Even as an educator who does this, it was like triangle shaped, similar to a highlighter. But it was, you could tell she probably either tried to use it or it was old because it was very sticky. And so we immediately were like, what do we do? And I, being a promoter of Talk Sooner, began to use my resources and turned to Talk Sooner to get education on how to talk to my daughter about substance use.
It is one of those things where you're like, I do this for a living. I'm an expert. I talk to my kids about it all the time, and the pressure is intense.
Yeah, and she happened to be in the video, and she said, you know, it was pressure from her friends. So not all the time, just like Sweet Carolyn, it doesn't matter how affluent, it doesn't matter that your parent is a health educator, and with all your friends and talking to them, that pressure still persists. To kind of, as Zoe mentioned, to be cool or to fit in, or it's just everyone has one. So of course, especially moving into high school or being the upper echelon in high school, you want to be seen, you want to be cool, you want to be noticed. And unfortunately, vaping is one of the things that they're choosing to do.
As a health educator and having your own child experience this, has it changed the way you talk to kids?
I will talk to kids anywhere, anyhow, anytime, any day. If you need me to talk to your kids, I will talk to your kids. I don't have a problem with it, and I think my kids know it, and they're like, oh, here comes mom. But always, I mean, and one of the tools in Talk Sooner talks about teachable moments and like having those difficult conversations in the car. You can't escape the vehicle, you know, or just anytime you see something going on, I'll pick up the phone like, hey, did you hear about that? Did you see that? I just need you to know that this too could happen to you. You are no different. You know, so just using the tools, turn to talksooner.org, use those tools that are there to use the teachable moments to have a healthy conversation with your kids about what's out there. And you can vape way more than just nicotine, unfortunately. If you can liquefy it, you can vape it.
That's terrifying.
Yes.
Vicki, tell us about the work you do.
So I work for Arbor Circle. I do prevention in all of our 5 counties, so Newaygo, Kent, Muskegon, Allegan, and Ottawa. And I've been doing this work for 8 years, and I love being part of Talk Sooner.
I love having you up here because I call you my hope. You're my ray of sunshine. Because everything we've heard can bring you down. You can be like, wow, our kids, those poor kids. But parents and educators and caregivers, we still have an influence, don't we?
Oh my gosh, yes. We are their first teachers. They look to us. And so really what we do at Talk Sooner is we want to empower parents. We want to give them the facts about these emerging drugs. And then we want to give them the tips to have those difficult conversations, which we can start when they're teeny tiny. And we're not going to be talking to them about vaping nicotine when they're 3, but we can talk to them about healthy choices and what makes our body feel good and how do we take care of our body. And then as they get older, we just continue to grow that conversation. But the main thing is to be that safe person. Like Karan took that moment. She didn't like go ballistic when she found it, right? She took that moment, she centered herself because she knew that she wanted Layla to think of her as that safe person to always go to. So we want to empower ourselves, we want to find those teachable moments and just make sure that those bonds are really strong.
So what scares you the most when you think about the pressure from big tobacco and the pressure from peers? What scares you and yet you feel like we're going to do okay?
I mean, I think having conversations like this, Casey said it best when he feels like the stigma is beginning to lessen. Dr. Shelley talked about the mental health crisis that we're in. All of these things are coming together, and we need to all work together to empower parents, to empower the community, and to empower our kids. We all need each other, and I think if we can work together to educate, to support, that's where the hope is. I mean, big tobacco is going to do what big tobacco is going to do, and I'm going to do a Dr. Shelley action figure. She's my new hero. We need to just sick her on them. But we've got to do what we can do here, and there are so many things that we can do. Have dinner together, turn this show on, and talk to your kids. Even if they're teeny tiny, you can talk and say, you love Miranda, you love going to her park parties. She's talking about some bad stuff. So let's talk about the good, healthy stuff, and then we can talk about the stuff that's not so healthy. Have a more nuanced conversation with your 13-year-old. Google something. I'm famous for just saying, I don't know what that is, let's Google it. And I do it, and then we have a conversation about it. You can do that at the dinner table. Karan stole my car story because everybody knows that I love talking to the kids in the car. My kids are actually afraid to be with me in the car now. But that's a great time because you are stuck there and you don't have to make eye contact. So use those moments, and it doesn't have to be like a big deal. It can be just anywhere. And parents, the other thing is really when kids, especially as they get older, if they take a moment and they want to talk to you, drop everything and talk. And then really listen. And again, you're connecting, you're making that bond, and that's where the magic is. And so that's where there's the hope, is that bond between all of us together, right?
Wow. As I listen to all of this, I'm just like so thankful that we have all of these great individuals in our community, and you're fighting for our kids and our families, and I want to say thank you. So we've asked folks to send in questions, to submit them. If you're watching online, you can again go to kenttruthAboutVaping@gmail.com. Send us some questions. We've got questions from students that have already been submitted. I know some of you in the room have submitted questions. So I'm going to have some of our panelists who have kind of agreed to help us with this question part of it come up. And I did get one I'm going to start with that came in through email. I think, Carolyn, are you being shy? Why don't you come on up? I think, oh, I do want you for sure. Which Carolyn? You. This is the first one. This is going to go to Dr. Schmidt, though. This is there any way to help hold vape sellers responsible for giving or selling vape products to underage people?
So this is our next step. This is kind of maybe the conclusion. What do we do next, right? And so we really need to be regulating all nicotine products the same way to the minimum standard that we regulate alcohol. So it's not only about T21, age 21 to buy, but it's also about making sure that it's separated. It's not in front of you when you come into the party store. Okay, it's in a separate location, away from the clerk, that the owners of the shops are the ones who get fined, not the person who's selling, which is what we do with alcohol. And so we need to criminalize selling this to minors. And in addition, we need to talk about taxation, right? So we need to cover also paying for nicotine rehabilitation, right, and addiction services. So we need to do that. We also have to pay for enforcement, just like we do for alcohol. And so that's our biggest problem in the state. is we have laws in place that we don't enforce. And so, but with nicotine, we need to put those laws in place. We need to look at our laws for alcohol, scratch off alcohol, write in nicotine, and get these to our legislators, get them on the governor's desk. We are here in West Michigan, and our priorities are very clear. It's like number one, God, and number two, our kids. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be putting our kids first in this state, in this country. And this is what we're going to take to get things started. In addition to all the education work, in addition to having our parents having these conversations with our kids, incredible moms and parents who are dealing with these issues. But we really need to get our legislators on board, we need to get our voices up there, and we need to make sure that there's some significant changes, because if we wait for the feds to do this, and there are million applications the FDA has from these companies that are just drowning them, it's not going to happen. We need to do it.
Dr. Schmidt for president. Dr. Schmidt. Okay, thank you. You're right, though. So I want to know, I guess from some of our vaping experts, if I see an adult buying for a minor, which, by the way, I did hit a lot of Wild Bill stores across West Michigan, had great conversations with a lot of people. Everybody wants to talk about vaping and pot and torches and everything else. Isn't it weird I say those things? So anyways, I ran into a lot of parents who were buying for their kids. And it felt very strange, and I didn't, I wasn't the cop, I wasn't going to bust them, but this is happening all the time because parents are like, you know what, my kid is stressed out, let them have a little pot if they need to settle down. Can a parent step in and be like, hey, that's a minor, are you sure you should be selling to that person or to that mom who's giving it to a minor, or do we just need to zip it?
I agree with Dr. Schmidt. I believe that the owner of the store should be fined. And I also feel like that parent needs this conversation. A lot of times there's not enough information about vaping and the results of it or what's going on in your lungs. And so they're going to be ignorant to the fact until they watch something like what you're doing. So thank you. But another situation is finding those opportunities to educate the parent. Where are the parents going to get that information from? And Talk Sooner is there to be a resource to parents, but we also need factual information from doctors, and it's going to be a long way out before we have results on like we did with nicotine. So we have to continue to do a good job like we did with cigarettes and keeping it out of the hands of our young people, and then educating adults about the dangers of vaping.
Great. Yes, please add, Lauren.
I just want to add to that, also changing the narrative around the stress that's impacting youth, right? And so learning other healthy coping mechanisms, adding that into the conversation. There's research that shows that nicotine only amplifies depression and anxiety, so it's a vicious cycle. Another great resource on top of Talk Sooner is the Truth Initiative. They have great information, facts, resources as well, but really empowering our youth with healthy coping skills for stress and mental health concerns.
Great. Another question that was sent in, and I'm going for Carolyn on this one. What are some things that were sort of your first clue, things were starting to get messy with your son?
So really kind of normal teenage things. He slept a lot more. He got a little grumpier. He would not want to tell us as much where he was going. He wasn't as open about like where he was going and who he was with. He had a shift of friends. Hey, there's a sign. He did. He had a shift of friends, different people he was hanging out with. So that, in addition to catching those whiffs every now and then of of the smell of the fruity vapes and stuff.
Good. We have some questions that have just come in. Thank you, Nick. How can the effects of vaping control your mind and to kind of throw off your entire day?
Yes, so we talked really briefly at the beginning about how nicotine acts in the brain, that it acts at this instinctual center to create this safety feeling. But then the longer it's been since you've had that nicotine pulse, you begin to feel the threat. And so while some people believe they personally feel better with nicotine in terms of their ability to focus, the studies actually show that you're not better able to focus, and part of that is in part because you're having this threat indicator happening to you, instinctual threat. And so even though you don't see a saber-toothed tiger standing next to you, that's what it feels like the longer it's been since you've had the last nicotine exposure. And so it's so powerful. But in addition to that, after nicotine interacts with that instinctual center, then it sets off pulses throughout the brain that do different things. One, again, heads to the risk-taking center of the brain, which leads to that increased risk-taking. You're looking for gain in other places, not just the nicotine. But it also goes to our emotional centers. And so that's where, to the point about an increased long-term anxiety and depressive disorder that comes into play with long-term nicotine use. And importantly, in our kids, their brains are still developing. And so if your brain is seeing the same type of signaling over and over again, let's say you're trying to learn how to play the violin, your brain's like, oh, okay, I see that's pretty important. So I'm going to put that part of the brain on a fast track, and I'm going to hardwire it in, because playing the violin's apparently important. Speaking English, important. The brain can't tell the difference between that and an addiction. And so if the brain is seeing over and over again a nicotine addiction, it's going to hardwire that into the brain. And that is why they want your kids. This is why they want the developing brain, big tobacco and nicotine, because they know that if they can get that addiction in, they get it hardwired into the brain. And me as a pulmonologist, when I see a patient come in who's still smoking, even though they've had their throat carved out for throat cancer, when did they start smoking? They started smoking this, middle school and high school, because that addiction was hardwired into their brains. And that's what we've got to prevent. We cannot let big tobacco hardwire addiction into our kids' brains. We need to let them develop in their interests in what they want to do.
Good stuff, yes.
I've actually got a little piggyback kind of with that different point of view on when it goes to marijuana. So my son's point of view when that goes to marijuana is that getting high all the time and using that makes you not want to do all the things that used to bring you joy. That is exactly what he has said. So that's, yep, all the things.
This next question, I really like this because I think many of us are feeling it. Do you think there are any ways to really prevent teens from vaping? Lauren, what do you think?
I think absolutely. I can definitely see how people would feel bogged down from this heavy topic, because it is a heavy topic, but I mean, like you said, Vicky's a ray of sunshine, and I'll add to that sunshine as well. But absolutely, I think taking bits and pieces from everything that we've all shared in this conversation, starting the conversation early, focusing in, yes, on educating about the dangers, but then also elaborating and expanding on that, right? Building that bond with your kid, building on their assertiveness skills, their communication skills, their self-esteem, their self-confidence. There's so much that can be a part of this, and there's youth right now that are not vaping, and I think that those are great, that's a great evidence right there that it's possible.
So this question is going to be for you. There are a lot of teen smokers. Is there anything that you could say to them that would convince them to stop? What did you say to your daughter?
Good question. It started again with education, and then trying to get to the root cause of things as to why she would choose to do this and what benefits were to come out of it. And really, when we're just talking about, well, my friends thought, well, you know, what are your friends doing? Like, are your friends' home situations the same as yours? Could they have other things going on that maybe you don't? And just like Lauren was saying, getting to not only the root cause of things, but finding different coping mechanisms. And then focusing on the positive perspective and flipping those statistics. So we may hear, oh, everybody's doing it, but let's talk about the kids that aren't doing it. And let's start having billboards that talk about the kids that aren't doing these things. And as we talk about promotions and we do different assessments to figure out what kids are doing, let's flip them on their heads and talk about who's not doing it and really uplift those kids. And so that they become the new cool kid.
Love it, love it. So, Doctor, what I would like to ask is, you know, we have kids are going to vape sometimes. They're going to try something, and parents beat themselves up. And kids might be addicted already and feel really bad about that. Tell me how that whole cycle works and how we can break that.
Yeah, I think that breaking that stigma, and again, that's, you know, in your story was so powerful, and I feel like in the talks that we had given to middle school and high school parents, they would come up to us and either my kid's not doing it, it's their friends, or they're looking at their shoes because they're shameful that their kids are doing it. And it's like, this isn't about you. This has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your kid. This is an addiction that's been put on them to make money. And so I think we do have to change that narrative about it's not about a good or bad kid, it's not about a good or bad parent, because it's really not. And I think that the issue about the coping mechanisms is so important, because if we as parents, if we as adults use substance to cope with anxiety, our children will use substance to cope with anxiety. And now you're just arguing about which substance is worse or better, okay? So we have to model for them how to get away from using substance to deal with anxiety and depression, and whether that's through, you know, mindfulness, through friends, through some people, through religion, through exercise, all the different ways that we can deal with that. That's how we need to frame that conversation to help them with the root cause, which is the horrifying anxiety that comes from being a teenager, which is completely understandable, and then with a pandemic. And so there are ways out of this, but I think reducing that stigma, taking away that it's not about good and bad, it's about how do we get our kids back. And I think, you know, one thing that was really powerful about your story and Casey's story was getting kicked off the track team. If we treat this addiction in a punitive way, you're getting detentions, you're kicked out of school, you're kicked off teams, you are setting them up for a worse socioeconomic outcome than they were already going to have. We have got to find a way to stop with the punitive in this and wrap resources around really a support group mentality, because when it comes to this developmental age, it's the peers that matter. You hear them telling you it's the peers that get me to do it, it's the peers to get them out of it. And so we really have to focus our efforts on how do we create almost a support group type environment within our schools instead of this punitive environment, which, you know, in his case, sent him further down the track. And that's what happens with these kids when we just kick them out of school or kick them off the teams.
And that is a beautiful setup for Kent County and for Talk Sooner, because we want to do that, and you are doing it. Yes. What's available for us right now for prevention?
Well, I'm in the schools doing the prevention education with youth in that capacity. So that's a big proponent. Unfortunately, though, we can't get into all the schools. So there are other pieces and other avenues to that as well. Do you want to add to what else is available for prevention?
Sure. So just like Lauren, I'm in the schools teaching advanced life skills, but we also, through the health department, have funding for tobacco education. And so we have a program called Vape Educate. And so we work with our school systems to have them offer it as an alternative to suspension. So the youth will be able to go onto this website, do these lessons. I want to say there's 7 lessons, 20 minutes apiece. They can't click through them. They have to read it and interact with it. And then once it's complete, a certificate goes to the student and it goes to the principal. And then that's like their entry back into class. So that way they're not suspended. They're still able to complete the education, and you know, it kind of is a restorative situation.
And then talksooner.org, loaded with simple ways to get those hard conversations started. So many great resources, and all of you are available, I know, to chat with people and continue the conversation. Let's give all of our participants a big round of applause. Thank you all. You guys are the best. I really appreciate that. If you are joining us and you are watching and you say, I didn't get to ask my question, that email address remains open. You can go ahead and send that. You can go to talksooner.org. They've got great experts who want to hear from you. For those of you who are joining us in the room, we have a series of things for you to look at in the back of the room. My friend Heidi has brought some things that kids are stashing pens in and all sorts of things. You will look at that and say, you're kidding me. I thought it was a necklace. Yeah, take a look. You won't believe it. And they also have information for you to look at and learn. Guess what? Because you're here tonight, my friends at Big B said they want to give away some prizes. So we have, my friend Zoe actually, hid some stickers under your seat. So if you have a sticker under your seat or you're next to one, don't like chase your neighbors down. But if you have that, I'd like to meet you in the back of the room. I have a $25 Bigby gift card. There should be 2 of you here, maybe more. This will all be available for you at the Kent County Health Department's Facebook page. They have this whole stream, as does woodtv.com. We will have it up online later this evening. I want you to share this link because this was too good to keep in this room, correct? Yeah. Absolutely. I also want to take a moment to just thank Kent County Health Department for inviting us in. Steve Kelso, thanks for making the call and helping us say we got to keep this conversation going. Thank you. I also want to thank all of our Talk Sooner friends. I want to thank Spectrum Health, Carolyn. Let's give them all one more big round of applause. And at this point, you are dismissed. I do have a lot of snacks over there. Take a few home for the drive. Thanks again for joining us, and let's make this the beginning of the conversations we're going to have as a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you.